it can be really frustrating when you have practiced with different fuel, everything feels good, and then race day falls on a certain time of the month for you, and then you feel like garbage. I mean, I think some of it is just kind of luck of the draw. Like sometimes there's just going to be runs where something does not agree with you, and sometimes it's hard to figure out what it was. But I think the more trial and error you can do leading up to the race, that's going to be less and less likely to happen.
Welcome to the Eat for Endurance podcast. My name is Claire Shorenstein, and I'm a registered dietitian and running coach based in New York City. My goal for this podcast, aside from having fun, of course, is to demonstrate that there is no one-size-fits-all style of eating. Rather, there are many different pathways towards individualized health and sports performance. I explore this in my athlete nutrition profiles as well as in interviews with fellow dietitians on their areas of expertise. My guest today is Anne Mauney. She's a DC area-based registered dietitian with a Master's of Public Health. She's also a mother, a runner, and a lover of travel, adventure, the great outdoors, and healthy recipe creation. She does a lot of that in her blog called Fantastic Food, and that's with her name Anne in there. And she has her own nutrition counseling private practice to help clients improve their relationships with food via an intuitive eating approach. So I asked Anne to come on the show today to talk about a topic that I've been meaning to cover for quite some time: exercise and GI issues. Now, I know events have been canceled, but many of us are still training and training hard and training long. So I thought that this would be a great topic to cover with another dietitian, as it's very common, especially in sports that involve running, to encounter athletes who complain of stomach issues and consequently trouble fueling themselves adequately and, experience reduced performance and recovery. It also can be really overwhelming and daunting to try to figure out what the best combo of what to eat before, during, and after workouts and events is for you, as it involves a lot of experimentation and sometimes GI distress. So I really hope our discussion today can help some of my listeners who are struggling with this. Without further ado, please enjoy my discussion on exercise and GI issues with Anne Mauney. Hey Anne, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor.
Awesome, of course. Now, today's topic is exercise, and often it goes really more with runners, so we'll probably focus a little bit more on runners, but exercise and gastrointestinal or GI problems, because they are very common, especially in endurance athletes, and really get in the way of performance and subsequent recovery. So as sports dietitians, obviously this is an important one that we cover. But before we dive into today's topic, can you introduce yourself a bit, including your background as a runner and dietitian?
Sure. Yeah. So I am, like you said, I'm a dietitian and also a runner myself. So I've done a few marathons, a whole slew of half marathons. And I also have basically, I work for myself. So I have two facets to my business. So one is my blog, which is called Fantastic Food. So FANNE, Tastic Food. And I've had that for about 10 years now. And that's a place where I share just recipes and quick meal ideas and running and training adventures and just kind of life and what I'm up to as well. And then I also have a private practice, which can be found at andrd.com. And I work with primarily from a focus of intuitive eating. So helping clients to improve their relationships with food. And that includes a lot of runners as well.
Awesome. And I know this isn't so related to the topic, or at least not directly, but with intuitive eating, I also interviewed Heather Kaplan, who I'm not sure if you know her, but she's also an intuitive eating dietitian. And oh, wonderful. She's amazing. She's great. I love all her her podcasts and all the things she puts out. And but just like as an intuitive eating dietitian working with athletes, can you just kind of shed some light on that? Because I always just love to hear more about people's, the different ways that dietitians work with athletes, especially when using an intuitive eating approach.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a question I got a lot, actually. I literally just finished this week writing an intuitive eating for runners blog post. So that will be coming soon and will probably be live by the time this podcast is. But so I think people are a little confused about that because intuitive eating and sports nutrition may not sound like they can go hand in hand, but they actually can. So the way that I work with my runners and athletes in terms of sports nutrition is really focusing on making sure that they're getting enough fuel And really, the only time we're looking at specific numbers is usually during their long endurance workouts, because that's the time when listening to your hunger and fullness cues, like with intuitive eating, is not really reliable. Like, I'm sure
Yes.
you know, like you're not like in the middle of a long run thinking, wow, I could really go for whatever, So it's really just kind of
Mhm.
eating for a necessity at that point and making sure you're staying ahead of those needs. So,
Yeah.
yeah. So really, during those endurance workouts is the time where we'll really look at some of the specifics and numbers and make sure that they're taking in enough fuel and then tweak it from there. And then same with immediately after a run, not looking at numbers, but just making sure that they're taking enough fuel. And then the rest of the day, we're really just looking at the normal intuitive eating, trying to help them figure out what feels best for them physically at different times of the day, avoiding getting too hungry, and as a result, avoiding getting too full. So,
Yeah. Absolutely. And that connection, that really strong connection between what you're putting into your body and how you're feeling, and I mean, I know that's
mhm,
really an oversimplification of
exactly.
intuitive eating, but at the crux of it, that's a really important piece. And that very,
Absolutely.
very much is a good segue into GI issues because
Yeah.
obviously, and of course, getting enough fuel in because so many athletes, and particularly endurance athletes, really struggle to fuel well, to fuel appropriately, to fuel adequately because of
Hmm.
the issues they encounter, or maybe it's just the fear, the fear of having, to run to the bathroom,
Yeah.
or sometimes
Yeah.
even fear of peeing, like, I don't want to stop in a race and all
Oh,
of that.
yeah.
Um,
Of course,
so
especially during a race. But I mean, even normally, it's frustrating and embarrassing. And yeah, you don't want to have to find a bathroom.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that was a really good segue into today's topic, which is again gastrointestinal. Can't even talk today. Gastrointestinal issues in the context of exercise and sports nutrition. So I know to my listeners, I know your events have been canceled, but many of us are still training. I'm sure you do. I have many clients who are still training and working with me on sports nutrition. Many are training, at high volumes, at high intensities, over long distances. There's not like they're just, I mean, some people have changed the way they are exercising, but many haven't. So, I thought that this would be a really great topic to cover, especially with another dietitian, as it's, of
Mhm.
course, very common in runners and other endurance athletes who frequently complain of stomach issues. And then, they obviously have a reduced or, just subpar performance as a result.
Yeah.
And of course, it can be really daunting to try to figure out the right, whatever that in quotes, right combo of what to eat before, during, and after workouts and events. There's a lot
Mhm.
of experimentation involved, sometimes even some GI discomfort if you end up taking a product or a food that doesn't sit right. So I'm really hoping our discussion today can help some of my listeners who are struggling. And
Mhm.
one thing I'll just say too, before I turn things over to you, one thing to really keep in mind as a reminder to my listeners that when it comes to GI tolerance, is that each individual is very different. Tolerance
Yeah.
varies dramatically among individual athletes. And I think we all know someone who can pretty much eat anything and run immediately afterwards without any issue.
Mhm.
I've had a client who I swear would like have like a giant salad, like kale salad, with, like
Oh,
black beans.
yeah.
Like, I'm just like, I don't
Mhm.
understand you. And then, of course,
Yeah.
we know people who can barely tolerate water, and
Yeah.
they come to us just with really struggling, not being able to get through workouts, wanting to train for a marathon or whatever it is. So
Mhm.
just a quick reminder that, as with everything when it comes to nutrition, it's very individualized, and today we're just going to kind of go through some general things to hopefully help some of you. So okay, so with that said, let's kick things off. Can you briefly explain some basics when it comes to digestion exercise, things that, explain why individuals may experience GI distress during exercise?
Mhm. Yeah. So basically, when you are exercising, your body is going to slow your digestion essentially. Basically, it's going to say, okay, obviously our energy is needed elsewhere. So it's going to start diverting blood and energy to the muscles and the lungs. And as a result, that means that if you have just taken in something that takes a little longer to digest, like anything higher in fiber or protein or fat, um, it's going to sometimes cause some distress because basically your body is diverting its energy to other things and not assisting as much with the digestion. So it's slowing down the digestion, and that just might cause some discomfort.
Yeah. Yeah, no, makes absolute sense. And of course, there are so many different things to consider when we talk about fueling exercise in a way that gives you adequate nutrition but minimizes GI discomfort. So, I guess the first question that we often get is, and I'm sure you get this all the time, is do you even need to eat something before you exercise?
Yeah.
And of course,
Mhm.
that the answer is, well, it depends,
Mhm.
on the time of the day, the type of the workout, the distance intensity, all that kind of stuff. So
Mhm.
yeah, maybe, and of course, other things we keep in mind, the timing of nutrition, what you are consuming, real food versus product, what types of nutrients, all that kind of stuff. So if you can kind of speak to some of that, that would be awesome.
Yeah, so I would always say making sure you're having something before you work out is really beneficial. It's basically like trying to drive a car without any gas. If you don't have any fuel in your body at all, you're just honestly just not going to have as good of a good performance while you're working out. So having even just a really small something is just going to give you a little bit of that energy boost that can make you get the most of your workouts. So yeah, so generally the guideline is, have a meal or a snack 1 to 3 hours before your workout. But obviously, for people who work out first thing in the morning, myself included, obviously I'm not going to wake up at 4 a.m. or 3 a.m. and have a full meal so I can run at 6 a.m.
Yeah.
So I think this is one of those things where it's okay, great. If you work out later in the day, great, then have a meal or a snack 1 to 3 hours before, depending on that trial and error. But if you're working out first thing, just having something very small immediately before you go is also a great option too, just to give your body a little bit of energy, so that you're not just trying to work out without any sort of, yeah.
What are your go-tos if you're working out at 6 a.m.? And do you ever do any fasted runs, like say if you're doing something easy and relatively short?
Mhm. So I know there's kind of different schools of thought with the fasted runs. I don't, because I don't do fasted runs because I tend to find that it not only affects my performance, but also leaves me far too hungry after the workout, where I
Mhm.
start getting a little bit nauseous. So for
Mhm.
me, I've definitely found that it makes sense to have a little something. It's actually interesting we're having this call now because just in the past maybe 4 months, my normal go-to, which was always toast with peanut butter, for some reason does not agree with me anymore. I don't know why.
Mhm.
I used to always be able
Mhm.
to eat that immediately before going out the door. It was never a problem. I mean, not a huge piece, but depending how quickly I was going out, maybe half a piece
Mhm.
of toast with nut butter. For whatever reason, that just did not sit well with me the past few months. So finally, just about a month ago, I started doing my other go-to, which is a banana with a little bit of nut butter, and sometimes even just half a
Mhm.
banana if I'm going right away and it's not going to be that long of a workout. And
Mhm.
that seems to work well for me. So that's just another good reminder that not only can what you can tolerate change, but it's also important to experiment. And what works for me may be totally different for someone else. Like you said, we all know that person who can eat like everything fiber, everything protein, everything fat, and then go running 5 minutes later and they're fine. And then there's
Mhm.
people who can barely tolerate anything. So I think having a little something is definitely better than nothing, not just for the
Mhm.
performance during the run, but especially for how you're going to feel afterwards too. How
Yeah,
about you? Do you
absolutely.
eat before a workout?
For me, it varies. I mean, I haven't trained for anything major in a while. I think,
Mhm.
God, when was the last? I haven't run a race. I have a almost 8-month-old now, and you have a 2-year-old, correct?
Yeah,
Almost 3-year-old. Yeah.
2.5. Mhm.
Okay. And I feel like that changes your body too and what you can tolerate. I mean, I don't know. I feel like
Yeah.
postpartum, all kinds of crazy things happen. But yeah,
Definitely.
I usually if it's just like a really easy 4 or 5 miles, maybe even 6 miles, I sometimes and it's like at an easy pace, I would just have
Mhm.
water.
Mhm.
Sometimes I used to have a very sensitive stomach back when I was training more competitively. Like it was
Mm.
really hard for me. And then I was able, once I got into ultra marathons more, I started eating more real food and training my
Mhm.
gut, which we'll talk about a little bit.
Yeah.
And I was able to tolerate like a half a banana. And then of
Mhm.
course with races and anything really substantial, I would get up at like 4 in the morning and
I
eat
mean,
something.
for a race, I think that's definitely justified, but for the everyday
Yeah.
run, yeah.
No, well, I sometimes even before my 20 milers, like, but I mean, to be fair, I talked about fear earlier on, and when we were recording, and to be fair, like my fear is deep. I was like traumatized by my first marathon experience. I had the worst GI
Oh,
issues,
oh
and
no.
this is pre-dietitian days, and I didn't really know
Oh,
any better. But I think just that experience kind of scarred me a little bit, and whenever I would like prep for a marathon, like waiting in the crowds, I would just be like freaking out. But no, I
yeah.
think
Oh,
I've definitely grown. I've grown a lot since then, and so whenever I get people who like this is definitely a topic near and dear to my heart because
yeah,
I
absolutely.
myself experienced the horrors of having GI issues during a race.
It's
But
so bad.
but yeah. Yeah, so for me though, I mean, I definitely try to eat something. And it's funny nowadays, like I'll even have like a coffee, and of course, caffeine is a performance enhancer, and
Mhm.
I'll have a coffee even with some milk, and if I have that like at least 45 minutes before, like I'm good to go, like that, and like some
Mhm.
banana or whatever.
Yeah.
But anywho,
But that I feel like
time,
that's like a perfect example of how different. Like if I have coffee with milk before a run, it's a disaster. I love it after a run, but
yeah,
yeah, for whatever reason, my stomach is just not into coffee first thing. So yeah.
yeah, but I avoid all products with caffeine
But
because
I
I
like
just
those.
yeah, because I just don't even want to mess with it. So like
Yeah.
it like the gels and all those things.
Yeah. I do like
Anyway,
those for races.
yeah. In terms of timing of nutrition, I mean, let's talk a little bit. Let's just take timing in itself. You mentioned 1 to 3 hours before. I
Mhm.
think it's coupled with what you were consuming. Obviously, real food versus a sports product. Obviously, sports products are more easy to digest. And well, if we're talking at least gels and sports drinks and chews, we're not talking
Yeah.
necessarily energy bars. But
Mhm.
your typical sports product that is more carb based and simple carbohydrates is digested faster. Um, so those two things are kind of coupled together.
Mhm.
And a lot of times when people are asking about, okay, well, what can I eat and how much and how long, all that kind of stuff, there are just so many variances and factors that we have to think about. And as I mentioned, like for me, the distance and intensity, I always, and with my clients, I mean, I always encourage people to eat something if they can.
Yeah.
But there are some workouts, and sometimes people feel okay, where maybe you are okay not having anything. And I think, I forget which episode, Jason Fitzgerald, and
Mhm.
you'll talk later about your nutrition program for runners with him, but
Yeah.
he even mentioned that some people are fine running 10 or 12 miles, kind of not taking anything else on, but
Mhm.
we talked about how, or I think you guys mentioned like having something beforehand, or there's just
Mhm.
like lots of variances, and this is where I think, or why I think people just get so lost. And of course, it's always great to work with a
Mhm.
dietitian, we can help you, but
Mhm.
because there's just so many products on the market, so many confusing things to think about. So let's try to break down a little bit. So okay, in terms of the timing, and like let's talk training versus racing. Like obviously an important thing is experimenting, and a general rule of thumb I think is like the more time you have, the more you can eat, and the more you can change it up, meaning
Yeah.
maybe you don't just have a banana, you could add nut butter to it, or you can have, I don't know, a bigger meal, or that kind of thing. So I think that's
Mhm.
something I like to remind people of. And then with racing, I mean, do you have any thoughts or tips with like the timing aspect, especially? And again, I know events are canceled for a while, but what comes
Mhm.
to mind, for instance, are these big races where people are waiting around a bunch, and you
Yeah.
have these even late starts like Boston, or early starts, and I don't know,
Mhm.
just any kind of thoughts to that people can kind of take away on the timing and the what and the how
Mhm.
much.
Yeah, I think one mistake that I see people making a lot is with those races where you do have to get there crazy early and wait around for hours. It seems that people tend to often underfuel for those because they have maybe their normal fuel that they would normally have an hour before they run, but they have it 3 hours before the race.
Yeah.
So I usually try to encourage my clients to have pretty much exactly what they always do. Usually it's portable. So I feel like usually what people are eating before a run is pretty portable, like a banana or
Yeah.
toast or whatever, and bring it with them. So have something more substantial a little bit earlier because you'll want to get up early enough to fuel up a little more earlier. So have something that's still more low key, so higher in simple carbohydrates, still a little lower in fat and protein, but maybe having, the toast with nut butter and a hard boiled egg or something a few hours before the run, before the race. And then right before, at the same time interval that they normally do for the race, having their normal, pre run fuel at that time. Cause I think people just forget. They're like, well, I had my normal fuel before I left the house, but then why was my stomach grumbling when the race was starting? And they just forget that there's so much more
Hmm.
time in between the start. And then another thing to consider too is, especially often people are running faster during their races than they would during their training. So that also burns fuel more quickly. So sometimes they may need a little bit more fuel than they have during their
Hmm.
training runs because they're using it a little bit more quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. And in terms of like products out there, or actually, you know what? I'm gonna shelve that for a second. The days leading up to any kind of race or higher intensity effort, often we hear kind of watching out for fiber intake and all that, but you don't want to reduce it so much that you get constipated. And then again,
Hmm.
some people are totally fine and don't and include like a salad as part of their previous meal.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know if you have any like guidance on that. I mean, for me, I know I sometimes am just kind of like there are lots of general like common sense things that we tell people, and then they can again kind of use that as a base and then experiment off of it. But
Yeah.
but yeah, where do you kind of have people start out with when they're kind of playing around with all this stuff with fiber?
Yeah, so I would generally have them eat pretty normally, maybe until the day before the race, and then just kind of in a very low key way, dial down the fiber a little bit. So maybe instead of
Yeah.
having, a ton of broccoli with dinner, having just a little bit, or instead of having a huge salad for lunch, having it as a side, just being a little more mindful of that. Honestly, though, I think the
Mhm.
big thing to look out for in the days leading up to a race is anything too greasy.
Mm.
Or yeah, just anything that kind of normally you feel like sits really heavy in your stomach, like especially greasy, really heavy meals. Those would be the
Mhm.
ones that I would be more concerned about avoiding in the days leading up to a race and especially the day before a race versus worrying about too much about the fiber.
Got it. And then that's a good thing to point out because I think everyone's always so focused on fiber that we
Yeah.
will forget about the fat, right?
Yeah.
Um, So, and okay, so let's talk about kind of products and choosing products. There are like a billion different types of products and brands of
Hmm.
products. And again, I think especially for beginners, but even for seasoned athletes, it can be kind of daunting and overwhelming just trying to figure out which to get and which to try.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
sometimes you only have limited amounts of these long runs to try things. And then
Hmm.
maybe you're trying one brand or different flavors. It's just narrowing it down can be tough. So how
Yeah.
do you recommend people get started with all of this? Because again,
Hmm.
even though events are canceled right now, maybe people are doing some longer runs, and eventually,
Yeah.
hopefully races will start again.
Yeah.
So yeah, so for listeners who are kind of interested in dipping their toes into endurance work, or maybe just reevaluating what they're currently doing, yeah, maybe some tips there.
Yeah, so it is really overwhelming how many products are on the market. I mean, it's great, but it's overwhelming. So I would
Yes.
start with I would start with the gels. I just find that that seems to be a pretty sure bet in terms of being the least likely to cause any issues because they're built obviously to break down pretty quickly because they're mostly simple carbs, but also because they're actually easy to eat. Because
Mm,
a lot of the other ones, it's like the gummies and the beans and all that sort of stuff are a great fuel, but they're so hard to chew when you're running, and especially if you're new to fueling while actually running
mhm.
it can be really hard to get those down. So I would start with the gels. And the other thing that I would think about is I think often I see people tend to just take down the entire gel at once. So
Yes.
yeah, and I would actually encourage having it over a slower period of time. So taking almost little sips of it. So you're not
Hmm.
overwhelming your digestive system with a ton of fuel all at once. And that can really help go a long way with not only just kind of spreading out that energy, but also just giving your digestive system time to catch up. So I always run with a water, like a hydration pack, even during races. I know a lot of people don't like doing that, but it's nice because then
Hmm.
I can kind of take a sip of water, take a little bit of the gel. But yeah, I would definitely recommend not eating the entire gel all at once. Like even maybe over a mile, like slowly snack on it, and that'll help to make it a little bit easier to tolerate too.
Awesome. And let's talk about mixing products because and if I think this is relevant in many different situations. For instance, I often get asked, okay, so if I'm taking gels, can I drink the Gatorade that it's offered
Yeah.
at aid stations, or should I just
Mhm.
stick to water, or should I do both? And then
Yeah.
there, in the Ironman or in ultras or any kind of other endurance activity, you're not sitting there just taking gels all the time. Maybe you're incorporating some real food. Maybe you're doing sports
Mhm.
drink and gels and chews and bars,
Yeah.
any kind of long cycling event. So there are a lot of situations where, for need or not, maybe it's not necessary, maybe it is. You're taking on different things. So yeah, what thoughts do you have on this? How in situations where like you really can't be just taking gels for like 1,000 years, like
Yeah.
what tips do you have on that, that whole thing?
Yeah. So a guideline that I give my clients to work with, it just to give them a rough estimate of about how much they should be focusing on taking in, is if they take their body weight in pounds and divide it by 4, that's going to give them the just approximate carb grams that they need per hour during a long
Mhm.
workout or race. So that's kind of a good place to start. And then you can kind of look at the different fuels that you're considering taking in and see if that's kind of relatively around that uh, amount of grams of carbs. And with in terms of what actual fuel to take in, I think it's really just up to trial and error. So for me, I found that during a half marathon, I'm fine with just the gels. They're easy. I'm usually running faster. I just want something simple, and I just do water and the gels. But for the marathon distance, the full marathon distance, I found that I was getting just a lot lower energy and a little bit nauseous almost just doing the gels. And I found that I wanted something with just a little bit of fat and protein. So one of my favorites was dates stuffed with a little bit of nut butter and sprinkled with
Mm.
salt. And I have that on my blog with some of the nutrition information too, so you can kind of figure out how that
Mhm.
fits into your carb grams per hour.
Mhm.
And again, this is kind of where I go against the intuitive eating, not against it, but just go with, being smart about making sure you're getting enough fuel
Sure.
because you're not able to listen to your hunger cues. So yeah, I would do some of that, and then also occasionally a lower fiber granola bar. But just something to have a little bit more substance. So yeah, so if you're feeling a little nauseous by the end of the runs and just really sick of the gels and things like that, it may be worth considering some of the more real food. It is a little harder to chew while you're actually running, but I found
Mhm.
it worked pretty well for me. And again, you can use that body weight in pounds divided by 4 equals the approximate grams of carbohydrate that you need per hour
Mhm.
to just have that as a baseline to say, okay, do I need a little more than this? Does this feel right? Do I need a little less? Am I having some digestive issues? So that can be a good place to start to just try to play Tetris with the different products that you're thinking about trying. But I would say with the sports drinks, unless you've been doing those consistently during your training runs, I wouldn't take that for the first time during a race unless you run out of fuel and you're feeling really low energy, then yes. But if you're feeling
Mhm.
good and you've got your strategy, stick with it and don't try and mix it up on race day.
Okay. A few follow-up questions. So first on your dates, so this was dates and granola bars, that was in a race in like
Oh
environment?
yeah, yeah, and on my long training runs,
Wow.
yeah. So I would just have I would
Wow.
take the pit out of a date, put a little bit of nut butter in there, sprinkle it with salt, and put like a bunch of those in a Ziploc
A
bag and just
hydrate.
put them
Oh,
in my
okay.
yeah. And since I always carry a hydration pack, I would just stick it in one of the pockets in front that I could easily reach. Same with the granola
Uh-huh.
bar, and I did those during my training runs as well, so I was used to eating those.
Got it.
Yeah, but it was awesome because I just found I was just needing a little something more than just the straight simple carbs. So just that
Yeah.
little bit of, and the nut butter works well for me. So yeah, and it just
Yeah,
tastes
yeah.
good too.
Yeah, no, no, I was gonna say because that's a go-to of mine. I love dates. I do dates on the bike, and I do like dates or dates with nut butter or dates with just in like an almond or something.
Hmm.
Like when I was doing like trail runs and like slower stuff. But for me personally, and I don't know if any listeners can relate, but like when I'm like really racing, like really throwing down the hammer,
Yeah,
I cannot for the life of me eat anything real. I could not. I think
yeah,
I did cheese once, but like food, forget it. Like I think I
hmm,
would vomit. Or like I
yeah,
would the bathroom. So
yeah,
that's just me, like when I'm really, really racing hard. But
hmm,
once I go to like, trail running and hiking and, just
hmm,
meandering along, like I can eat a sandwich, I can eat whatever.
yeah.
But
Well, and
it's interesting. Yeah.
that's why it's so important too to practice the paces that you're actually going to, I mean, for many other reasons as well, but practicing those paces while actually fueling too. Because I think, yeah, sometimes runners get more used to just having their fuel when they're just running casually or running slower during their training runs, which doesn't really help them in terms of learning how to eat something while they're running a lot faster during a race. So definitely if they're doing more of a tempo style workout or practicing goal marathon pace, or during their runs, that would be a good time to also practice eating that fuel while they're actually running faster. Because otherwise, you're going to get to race day and be like, how do I do all this?
Yeah. Is it, I mean, would you think it's actually discouraged to have gels and sports drinks? I mean, again, I know it's an individual thing, but I know some people have complained of like GI issues with when they combine gels and a sports drink.
Mhm.
And but I know some other people who do it just fine. Like let's say you like maybe outside the marathon environment. Again, like if we're doing more of like an ultra or an Ironman kind of setting.
Mhm.
Do you work with any athletes who do like really long stuff, or mostly is it like shorter distances or marathon?
Mostly marathoners. Yeah, I don't
Okay,
work with a lot of triathletes. No.
got it. Okay. Yeah, I was just interested if you heard like had any like thoughts or feedback on like kind of specifically the combo of gel and sports drink. Because there are definitely like situations where people are like, oh no, I don't want just water, and but I
Mhm.
don't know. I think it all comes down to kind of an individual thing, and
Yeah.
really just making sure that you're getting what you need. And another thought is it's interesting the weight divided by four. I always kind of use that guideline of the 30 to 60 grams per
Yep.
hour for
Per
like
hour.
4 hours, and yeah,
Mhm.
60 to 90 over 4 hours. But
Yeah.
I guess that kind of might play out to be around in the same range. I don't know. What are
It
your thoughts on
is.
that? Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, it's in that range. It's just a way to kind of narrow down that range because it's like 30 to
Yeah.
60 grams carbs per
I
hour.
know.
Like, where do I even, so then I feel like people, what if they start with 60 and then it's way too much, so the pounds divided by four is kind of an in between of that,
Got
basically
it.
to
Yeah.
give people a little bit more specific place to start and then
Totally.
scale up or down from there.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah,
So let's talk a little bit more about.
because
Sorry. Go
a
ahead.
lot of it does depend kind of on how much fuel you're burning, which depends directly
Yeah.
on your size. And yeah, so.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit more about training the gut, because obviously the goal is, to get in. I mean, not like as many calories as possible, but it kind of is that in order to really, maximize your performance, and you're just
Mhm.
training your body to take in what it can. Obviously, we're not like going absolutely berserk here, but
Yeah.
we're trying to get to that optimal number of calories. We're trying to kind of get to that higher end of the range again that your body feels good taking, to really support performance. And what are your thoughts on how best to train it to take on that optimal number, like kind of when you're using that weight divided by four,
Mhm.
and kind of tolerating the appropriate pre-exercise meal and snack, and
Yeah.
especially like if you're getting someone who, because I just get lots of these clients who, I think the tendency, as you said, is for athletes to underfuel and undereat sometimes,
Mhm.
when they're really training a lot.
Yeah.
And maybe someone barely even drinks water because they're complaining of like that sloshing feeling, or they're afraid of having
Mhm.
diarrhea or nausea or whatever it is, and they're just so afraid. So I know kind of like starting slow, starting small, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, what is your kind of strategy on training the gut and working with people on these issues?
Yeah, honestly, I feel like the best advice is really just to start small, like you said. I mean, it really just takes a little bit of time for your body um, to get used to it, basically, and for you to get used to kind of how it feels and the process of eating while you're running and or
Hmm.
before. Yeah, so I don't know. I mean, do you have any other thoughts on that, especially since you work with more triathletes, it sounds like too, which especially those fuel needs are even higher. So I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think again, I mean, it depends on the distance and the person and all of that.
Hmm.
I mean, I definitely I had a client not that long ago. It was before all the quarantine stuff, but he basically never ate anything. He barely drank water. He ran marathons on literally nothing, which I
Oh
was
my
just like,
gosh.
I don't understand how you do that,
Wow.
and
Yeah.
like
And also, do you know how much
not
better
in
you
a
could run
short
if you
time.
actually fueled?
I know. And I get, I mean, multiple clients like this. And, but they complain. They're like, I literally have diarrhea nonstop, or I vomit or something if I take on anything, like even
Wow.
water.
Mm.
And I've gotten clients like this at various distances. So I think for me, what we're doing is, I mean, obviously we're looking at, what are you doing the night before, the day
Yeah.
before? Like,
Hmm.
the
Yeah.
starting point for everybody is everyday diet, of course, right?
Yeah.
So like, let's make sure that your baseline is you're not like on the toilet constantly. Like, let's let's make
Yeah.
sure that's okay. And then yeah, starting, definitely starting like small. Like literally, I think we did like a bite of a banana, like not
Yeah.
even,
Yeah.
and
Exactly.
like let's see how you do with that. Or
Mhm.
if I think we worked up to a slice of white bread with jam. That's what we got to,
Mhm. Yeah.
and
That's
that was like
great.
a huge
Yeah.
win.
Yeah.
Yeah. or like a certain gel, and then, or, again, like just, I mean, it can get really frustrating because these sports products, it's not like they're delicious to eat. And especially
Yeah.
with people, a lot of athletes are very weight conscious, which is a whole nother issue, which we won't get into right now. But
Mhm.
I think we're in agreement on like the weight stuff, but, for what I've, heard you talk about with Jason and everything,
Mhm.
like people don't want to just go around like eating gels nonstop. So finding the right
Yeah.
one,
Mhm.
it could be a stressful thing. And then of course the
Yeah.
stress around it just makes it worse. So yeah,
Definitely.
I think getting, finding something simple. Again, it could be a bite of white toast. It could be a bite of a banana,
Mhm.
whatever it is, a tiny bit, going slow, adding a little bit, maybe dialing back the pace a little bit.
Mhm.
There are lots of things that, we can kind of play around with.
Yeah, and
And yeah,
I like that you mentioned how much they're eating the night before a run too as a consideration, because that's definitely, so if you're waking up not hungry at all because you tend to eat a lot more closer to bedtime, then yeah, maybe you have a little more leeway to have less fuel before you go out for a run. But if you're like me, for example, eating at like 6 o'clock with my toddler, by the
yep.
time I go to bed, I haven't just eaten. So certainly by the morning, I definitely need some fuel. So that's definitely another consideration is, are you fueling closer to bedtime or not? If you're a morning runner, obviously this is a
Yeah, and sometimes what I have people do, is, especially if they are eating slightly earlier, if they cannot stomach something, like they can't just like have a banana and then go running. I have them add like a snack, something small, like maybe an hour before bedtime,
good idea.
and that seems to help a little bit too. So that's
Yeah.
always something you can do, and that's often something we want, is good to be doing anyways, like before a event of some kind. And when
Mhm.
I say
Yeah.
event, by the way, like in quarantine, like there's still, I saw you did a virtual 5K today.
I
Like,
did.
there's still
Yeah.
events going on. Like we could
Yeah.
still, talk about stuff. So,
Hmm.
I think it's still relevant personally. But, okay.
Yeah.
So, my next question is on electrolytes and hydration. That
Hmm.
of course can get in the way of our stomach feeling good or just general GI stuff. We have to make sure we're taking in enough salts, but not too much. You can get nauseous. And then, of course,
Hmm.
hydration issues certainly affects, how you feel and can lead to nausea and everything. What are your thoughts on that one?
Yeah. So for the hydration, the guideline that I give to my runner clients is to take in about 20 to 25 ounces of water or fluid per hour, or 500 to
Mhm.
750 milliliters. And that's another one that's a little bit up for trial and error. For me, I
Yeah.
tend to use, so with the fuel, for me, I definitely take more of a let me calculate this and make sure I'm actually getting enough fuel approach. With the fluid,
Mhm.
for me personally, I'm okay with doing more of an intuitive drinking type approach because I wear a hydration pack so I can kind of take sips of it whenever I feel like it.
Yeah.
But yeah, that 20 to 25 ounces per hour during the workout is kind of a general place where you can start. And and again, you can start on the lower end or even lower than that if you're just getting used to having water during a workout.
Yeah, and I think this is, an important one right now. We're about to go into summer.
Yeah.
In New York, at least, I mean, not everybody is wearing masks when they're running, but like the path where I run is so narrow that you kind of have to have something over your face.
Mm,
So it's like,
yeah.
I mean, and of course you're not drinking out of fountains right now, so you got to carry your
Yeah.
water, and like the mask gets. I mean, it's just a little different. Of course, people all around the country,
Yeah.
it's a different situation.
Hmm.
But if you're off running around your neighborhood, just making sure that, I just feel like people tend to not drink as much as they should.
Hmm. Yeah.
Or again, maybe they don't want to drink too much before they go because it'll just like slosh around their stomach. So
Yeah.
this is definitely an important consideration, especially for the longer stuff. When, especially in the summer. What about the salts
Yeah.
and, nausea and all of that?
Hmm. Yeah, so for the salt, the general recommendation that I give is about so two again a kind of large range, but 200 to 500 milligrams of sodium per hour. So per that 25 ounce of water. And for
Mhm.
reference, a quarter teaspoon of salt is 600 milligrams sodium. So that's so again, the reference was 200 to 500 milligrams sodium
Mhm.
every hour. So
Mhm.
yeah, this is another one where I kind of do a little bit more of a low key approach, but part of that is because I'm not doing the super endurance events as often where it is quite as crucial to really focus on this. Like if you're doing a summer Ironman, like you got to be on point with this, obviously.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's kind of the general recommendation for that. And a lot of the endurance products out there are formulated to, fit into the general guidelines and just make sure that you're getting what you need. So usually that's kind of taken care of for you. And if you're someone that is a really salty sweater or just a really sweaty workouter in general, you'll want more on the higher end. And there's a lot of great products that have extra salt added, or you can always do the, salt sticks or things like that. So yeah.
And that's where like I love like the salt stick pills and stuff. And I was doing that sometimes in some of the longer stuff because like some of the sports drinks, like I use Tailwind, which I love, and that has a really good amount of sodium if you're drinking it as it's intended. Some of the gels obviously have more sodium than others. Like there are some that have, I don't know, like quite a bit of sodium, but others have like 40 milligrams or like basically nothing, So I think you have to just make sure you're aware of what your product contains and then supplement accordingly. And then if with like salt stick, the problem is you don't taste it. So, I'm sure, everyone's been out on a race course or a training, run or whatever. And you, especially when consuming so many like sweet things. And then like, I don't know, like a marathon, like I think someone handed me like a pretzel or something. And I was just like, this is the best thing ever. Just that salt taste is so delicious. And so, but that's good feedback. Just like speaking of the intuitive part, like something salty tasting good is like, ooh, your body wants that. The only problem with the pills is like, you can't taste it. And so the danger, you can get nauseous if you're like over salting, although usually it will pass. You just have to like, just be careful and like wait it off a little bit. But it's just another one of those things. Just be careful what your plan is. Be aware, practice, all that kind of good stuff. But that's just another area I wanted to point out to people that, nausea and vomiting is definitely something can happen with hydration and electrolyte issues. All right, let's talk damage control. So let's say you make a nutrition plan to training. Maybe you work with a dietitian, you practice it, it seems fine, you get to race day and it just all goes sideways. Maybe you have nausea, maybe you have vomiting, whatever, you're running to the porta potties. How can, what do you recommend kind of getting through it, minimizing its effect on performance? I think maybe the go-to would just be like not to take anything at all, but that has its own consequence. I don't know. I don't know if you've ever dealt with this yourself or had clients who dealt with it. Any thoughts on that?
I haven't dealt with this during a race, knock on wood. I've certainly dealt with it on runs. I mean, this is a tough call because it's obviously especially if you're training very seriously for something and then race day, you're feeling like garbage. It's a pretty tough call what to do. I mean, honestly though, if you're vomiting and having diarrhea, it's just not going to be your race day, unfortunately. So I feel like that's one of those situations where you just need to say, okay, this is not my day. I'm going to walk this and just enjoy myself out, enjoy the time out here, or maybe just walk the rest of it. Or maybe I'm going to, not finish, and that's okay too. It's hard because I think especially for women at certain times of the month, the digestive system is a little bit more dicey. I know that's true for me. So it can be really frustrating when you have practiced with different fuel, everything feels good, and then race day falls on a certain time of the month for you, and then you feel like garbage. So I mean, I think some of it is just kind of luck of the draw. Like sometimes there's just going to be runs where something does not agree with you, and sometimes it's hard to figure out what it was. But I think the more trial and error you can do leading up to the race, that's going to be less and less likely to happen. But sometimes we just have days like that where it's just no matter what we do, it's just a disaster and it sucks. But you just kind of have to say, all right, that happened. I'm going to move on.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I keep thinking of like Meb and his races where he would be like puking on the side 10 times or whatever, and then he would do push-ups at the end or whatever it was. Was it Rio or something? So I mean, we all have bad days, and I think as much as you can turn it into a learning experience and just trying to manage it, and if you can tolerate small sips of water if that's all you can get down. But and then just learn from it and just move on to your next thing and think about what you can do differently. Or maybe you don't do anything differently. Maybe you do the exact same plan on another day and it works perfectly. It's just sometimes things are out of control, whether it's the weather or your stomach, I don't know. Any other common mistakes that you see athletes make that can lead to GI issues, either in training or racing that we haven't mentioned already and that you can share? I think we covered it.
I think we got most of them in terms of the GI issues. Certainly trying something new on race day is never advisable.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, we already talked about having too heavy of a meal the night before a race or too greasy. Yeah, I think we pretty much covered the main ones that I wanted to share. How
awesome.
about you? Any other ones?
I think that's about it. I mean, the only thing kind of that we didn't get into that much was like with more like ultra athletes, you know, and Ironman and ultra runners and that kind of stuff. Like some people just feel like GI distress is almost a given, you know, like it's inevitable, like it'll happen. And I think that's a really tough one. And, you know, I've spoken with, you know, a bunch of professional ultra runners who, you know, say like, you know, obviously some of us have good days and bad days. Sometimes it's just like I had issues and then I just figured it out. And it's what's really interesting and what this podcast is really all about in my athlete nutrition profiles is just seeing how different people eat with like to such, you know, to the great success. Right. Yeah. And whether it's someone like Mike McKnight, who actually just recently, he's a low carb, high fat athlete, which is not something I don't recommend ever, but he's amazing. And he literally just ran 100 miles on nothing but water and salts, which is incredible.
Yeah.
It's incredible. Wow. And we were chatting a little bit because I congratulated him and, you know, he was like, thank you. I think you're one of the only people in your line of work who didn't attack me for this. And I was like, it's not maybe you know, I wouldn't recommend it to anyone else, but you clearly have training for this for years. But we have people like on that end of things. And then of course, you know, people who are doing the more traditional carb approach, and real food. So, and I think with Ironman, because I work with a number of Ironmen and I don't, you know, at all pretend that I know everything and the secret to success to anything. You know, I'm also learning myself as a dietitian, but I'm not a triathlete myself. So I think when I work with triathletes, I sometimes only feel like I understand, but only partially understand. Because I think it's always as a dietitian, it's easier when you yourself know what it feels like to be in their. I mean, not in their shoes, obviously not in their shoes, but you know what I mean? Like you have done sports.
You know what it feels like to run a marathon or
exactly. Like when I work with ultra athletes, like I've done those things, you know, I know what it feels like to be in many of those situations. Of course has unique experiences, but at least I feel like I understand it a little bit more. And I cannot swim for the life of me and I do not bike those distances. So it's also, you know, a lot of the GI stuff, it's very sport dependent. And the benefit, of course, with the Ironman is that, you know, with bike, we can usually tolerate a little bit more and you can get some real food in. And because you're getting hungry over these distances, you need real food. You can't just depend on that stuff. But then with the swim, you can't take on anything.
Yeah.
You know, so it's getting into this whole thing depleted. So I think you know, all these different sports have such unique challenges. And some of these issues we've talked about are universal and others are very sport specific. So to all my listeners out there, I think it's really just, you know, figuring out like, okay, first of all, like what's the unique stuff going on with your sport? You know, if you're a runner, obviously there's a lot more jostling around your stomach. You have to be a lot more careful put in there. If you're purely a cyclist, you probably, you know, you could probably have a sandwich, you could have a bar, you know, a lot of people do bars and sports drink, maybe gels. You know, if you're just a swimmer, that's a different situation too. It has its own challenges. So yeah, I think, and that's part of what's exciting about sports nutrition. I'm sure you would agree. Like there's just it's, you know, not any one client's the same and there's a lot of different stuff going on and everyone's really unique. So there are a lot of different situations to work with. Anyways, that's my 2 cents. All right. So that wraps up our GI discussion. Hopefully you all found it helpful. Now let's move on. You worked with another guest of mine, strength running coach, Jason Fitzgerald, who's also awesome. And I love his podcast, Strength Running. And you guys did a nutrition program together called Nutrition for Runners. So maybe you can just give us a brief overview of the program you created together.
Yeah. So it's an all virtual, it's an ebook program. And basically we wanted to have kind of a one stop resource for runners. So it includes not just, it's called Nutrition for Runners. And it includes not just the nutrition information, a lot of which, we've talked about some of the things here, but obviously in a lot more depth. But it also
Hmm.
includes a lot of training plans from Jason as well. So,
Awesome.
yeah, so we just felt like it was a really good combination to marry both the actual training plans, as well as the nutrition stuff together. And it's created from the intuitive eating standpoint. So there's a lot of information about how to figure out if you're fueling your body enough outside of your runs using more of that intuitive eating process with some gentle nutrition involved, and kind of how
Hmm.
to make sure you're getting enough of your different macronutrients. And really, there's a lot of really easy throw together meal ideas. There's some actual recipes in there as well, both for before, during, and after runs. And
Hmm.
yeah, and then there's also information, like I said, more about fueling during the actual runs too, more from a technical standpoint as well. So, and we cover a lot of, frequently asked questions, Q&A, and that as well. So it's a great resource if anyone is interested in learning more about how to best fuel as a runner and also wants to have the whole training plan package as well. It's a great resource.
Awesome. Well, I'll definitely link to it in the show notes if anyone's interested. And of course, I'll include your website as well and your blog. And you have so many awesome recipes. Like, have you been cooking for a long time? And where do you kind of get the inspiration for what you make?
Yeah, so I've always been a fan of just really fast and easy recipes. For me, I'm
Hmm.
not someone that likes being in the kitchen for hours on end. So it was always important for me to show readers, like, here's how you can eat healthy in a way that doesn't involve, spending your entire weekend cooking. So
Hmm.
yeah, so I just love sharing really approachable, fast, easy, simple recipes that people can make and then enjoy the rest of their lives going on runs or hikes or being outside, or whatever they want to do in their free time, without having
Hmm.
to spend hours and hours in the kitchen. So yeah.
Awesome. That sounds great. Anything else you want to tell us about or share with my listeners?
I don't think so. I think we pretty much covered it all.
Awesome.
Yeah, I did want to mention the Nutrition for Runners program. If you can sign up to get on the email list and start for free. Basically, there's a series of different nutrition focused emails that'll get you started on it before you have to purchase anything. So there's, you don't have to pay anything to sign up and get going with that. If
Awesome.
you're interested.
That's great.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, we're going to wrap things up with my quick bites questions,
Yeah. Okay.
starting with favorite meal or snack when you're in a hurry.
When I'm in a hurry, I one of my favorite meals in a hurry is green salad bowls. So basically, just taking whatever greens we have in the fridge, like some sort of leftover rice or quinoa, or just 90-second microwave rice, and then
Hmm.
some sort of a canned bean, whatever veggies we have, maybe some cheese or avocado, and then whatever random salad dressing. But that's just one of my favorite go-to filling easy meals.
Hmm.
And then snack, probably just like the fast ones are probably just fruit, nuts, and yogurt, or toast with nut butter, just simple things like that.
Awesome. What about when you're not in a hurry?
Um, Favorite meal not in a hurry, probably tacos or something like that. And then snack, probably some sort of a fun baked good that I can share with a friend and enjoy and sit and savor and talk.
Awesome. Any favorite baked goods? Do you mean you make yourself or you buy? Or both?
I was thinking of buying out at a coffee shop with a friend, but
Got it.
right
Got
now,
it. Got it.
obviously, I'm not doing that. So, yeah, but if I'm baking myself, I like baking muffins and scones and things like that. So those
Hmm.
are always a good option. I have so many muffin recipes on my blog because I want
Ooh,
to.
yummy. I need to check that out. I
Yeah.
love baking with my 3-year-old and she obviously loves it too.
Yeah.
Um, all right, favorite post-race meal or snack? I know it's probably been a while, but
Yeah,
last
I
time you.
know. Either a burger and fries or some sort of like a biscuit egg sandwich situation if it's brunch timing. Yeah.
Awesome. Biggest cooking catastrophe or recipe fail?
So I lived in Prague for a year teaching English before I went back to school to become a dietitian after I'd
Hmm.
worked in DC for a while. And one day I tried to buy yogurt, but everything was in check and I didn't understand. So I bought sour cream by accident. And when I wasn't cooking with it, I was just trying to eat it as a snack, but that was an interesting surprise. Sour cream
Yeah, it's never fun when you're expecting something to taste a certain way and it's definitely not what you expect.
I think I was trying to stir it in my yogurt and I was like, oh,
yeah. Most bizarre or exotic food that you've ever tried?
A salmon poached in beeswax that I had at a restaurant here in DC years ago. So basically the beeswax was heated really hot, so it was liquid, and it was poured over the salmon, and then you let it cool and harden, and it poached the salmon. And then you take off the bees. It was so good. It was super tender and moist and like very slightly sweet. It was so good. It was just so creative too. Yeah. Wow. And they brought it over the table and like poured the beeswax over it at the table. It was really cool.
So it's like a whole spectacle.
Yeah, exactly.
That's so funny. Oh, how cool. That's very cool. How do you like your eggs cooked if you eat eggs?
Fried over easy. Runny egg yolk, always.
Yep, I'm right with you there. If you drink wine, beer, or liquor, if not other non-alcoholic beverage?
My favorite's probably Prosecco is my go-to. And then I really like beer as well. I've been getting more and more into IPAs. My husband loves IPAs, so I'm slowly starting to like those. And then I'm on a cider kick right now. There's a lot of fun local ciders happening here. Yeah, the non-sweet ciders, like the more dry ones.
Yeah, awesome. What foods remind you of growing up? What are your comfort foods? Actually, I don't even know where you grew up. Did you grow up in the DC area as well?
No, so I grew up in a military family, so we lived all over the place. Yeah. We always had, we still have it a lot, this taco salad. It's like greens and kidney beans and cheese and tomatoes and Frito corn chips and then Catalina dressing. It's just like so random, but it was such like a 90s salad, but it's so good. And we still have it a lot with my parents just because it's fun and nostalgic and also delicious. So.
Awesome. And were you all over the place, like in the U.S. or outside the U.S. too?
Both. So we mostly around the U.S., but we also lived in Germany for a year and then Belgium for a year. I was pretty young though, so it was kindergarten for me. I always hoped to get stationed back there when I was older, but no dice.
What's your favorite
for high school? So DC area is pretty much home.
Got it. So. What's your favorite ice cream flavor?
Coffee ice cream or mint chocolate chip.
Both good choices. Yeah. And last but not least, top 3 items of gear that are most essential to your active lifestyle.
Sunscreen, my hydration pack, especially if it's summer, and probably my running shoes.
Awesome. What hydration pack do you use?
I have the Nathan. I had the Nathan Intensity vest for a long time, and then I forget what the other one is called, but I love their running specific backpacks awesome. Yeah, they're just really lightweight. They don't bounce. So
I have a Nathan handheld that I like a lot, and I have an old Ultimate Direction vest that it's just like super old, so I might upgrade to another one once I'm trail running more. But not really much of that right now. Awesome. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Anne, for your time today and for talking to me all about these awesome topics. And where can everyone find you on social media? And if you can just list tell us your website again or websites.
Sure. So I am at Fantastic Food. So again, that's FANNE Tastic Food on all social channels. And that's also my blog URL. So fantasticfood.com. And then my business website for my nutrition coaching is annetherd.com.
Awesome. And you're doing all virtual work right now, I assume?
Yeah. So I'm booked up right now, but people can always email me if they're super interested in working with me, and I can put them on a waiting list or refer them to someone who has a similar approach. So, awesome. and then for the Nutrition for Runners program, that's hosted on Jason's website. So it's strengthrunning.com/nutrition.
Yep. Great. I will post all this stuff in the show notes. Awesome, Anne. Well, thank you again for today, and be well and stay safe.
Yeah, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
That wraps up today's episode. I hope you learned something from Anne in our discussion today on exercise and GI issues. And hopefully you guys will all be exercising, feeling well, or at least on the road to feeling well during your training and any events that are coming up. I know they're virtual for now, but hopefully someday down the road, someday not too far down the road, we'll be back to racing together in person. So please hit me up if you have any questions. As always, eatforendurance@gmail.com. You can also visit my website, eatforendurance.com, on social media channels, Eat for Endurance. And of course, as I said in my last episode, I am still taking on clients right now virtually, so please get in touch if you are interested in working together. I would love to work with you. So I hope you are all staying safe and doing well, and until next time, have a good one.